Hello and welcome to this evening's lecture about family life and creativity. And it'll be interpreted into German on channel 4 and to Danish on channel 2. And I'll stick to English. Yes, family life and creativity. When I was asked if I would give a lecture on family life and creativity last summer, I thought, well, I have some experience of both, so maybe I'll manage that. And then 10 months later, when I got this title out and I started thinking about it more deeply, I thought, family life, yeah, what can that be about? A screaming baby, sleepless nights, always tired and feeling helpless, or maybe a smiling angel that grows up to be a great support and friend through life. Or, yeah, what else? Frustration between professional life and your children, and Messlingen, what's that? Measles and that kinds of children's illnesses. Yeah, the list can be made long. And creativity. Well, you can think of Leonardo da Vinci or or Rembrandt or maybe Johann Sebastian Bach. And or perhaps amateur oil painting, creative writing, or handicrafts of different kinds. Yeah, there's lots. But also, I mean, life in general nowadays, and I think for quite a few centuries, has been filled of problem solving. We're always solving problems in our lives. And when one problem is solved, there's usually another one to be solved. And to solve problems, you need a certain degree of creativity. And there are all sorts of creativity also. I mean, people who are constructing bombs and missiles and planning warfare, they're also creative, although in a very inhumane way. And the people who have to take care of the mess where the bombs have been dropped and try to save people's life in demolished hospitals, they have to be even more creative and problem solving. So, and Martinus tells us that life experience and life in itself is creative in its essence. So, yeah, let's see how I put these things together. The theme of this week is about inspiration and joy in life. And Martinus is rather clear in this guidance, one can say. In the beginning of Livets book, already in section 17, he says, in order to help the seeker of truth to recognize if he has found the right source, which is especially valid for him, it will be helpful to mention that such people, things, or manifestations that are of a special inspirational value to an individual can very easily be recognized by the fact that they, by being experienced and sensed, send through the individual in question a flow of warm waves, a flow of life force and energy, of ideas, of longing to represent a higher degree of perfection, a flow of hope and faith in providence and the Father, of divine satisfaction, harmony and happiness, and an irresistible urge for loving. In other words, an increased ability to love everything and everybody. It's quite a strong statement. I think you would agree. And this these things that can inspire us. I mean, they can be very different things, such as metalwork. The guy up there in the corner, he looks very absorbed in his work. Or it can be music, and learning an instrument, and maybe through several incarnations becoming so good that you become a virtuoso. Cooking is also can be very inspiring for some people, and also looking after children, or oil painting, or lots and lots of other things. But the main point is, Martinus points out, that the individual is just there where he either has or can obtain contact with that through which his own inspiration can be released. It seems as if it's one of a rather important task in life to try and find out where we find inspiration. And if we have inspiration in the work we do, 5 days a week, I mean, it's so much easier to do the work and to do it in a way that becomes good for your surroundings and contributes to life and to society. And yeah, Martinus promises that in the future we'll have much more of that kind of work. And what about family life? Well, family life begins in the animal kingdom. Plants propagate, but they don't have to look after their offspring. And also these bird parents, they don't speculate whether to have offspring or not, and they don't get frustrated about the time and energy their offspring demand from them. It's all ruled by instinct, and it's a kind of paradise. I mean, there can be storms, and a sea eagle can come and take and eat up one of their little ducklings there. But all in all, it is a paradise. It's quite simple in a way, ruled by instinct. And also for human beings, terrestrial human beings, for thousands of years when we've lived as farmers and collecting food, and also further on, we've been governed by instinct, and the family has been a safe place, and we've even been, it's been a safe place, and often there's been joy, even if there's been battles and wars and famines going on around and outside the family. And at that earlier, I mean, we were able to be in love for several incarnations with the same person. We're not very good at that nowadays. But instincts degenerate, and family life becomes more complicated and more demanding. And babies, human babies, are more vulnerable than ducklings, for instance. And also parents are less suited for being parents. And the work as a parent also collides with your professional work and your interests. So it's not an easy puzzle to get together nowadays, having children. But children also bring joy, and their zest for life is really strong since they've recently been in the spiritual worlds charging their life batteries. And they're very, they really investigate life when they are 2, 3-year-olds and are very curious and want to, you can look at a snail for 10 minutes, and flowers and insects and the toolbox under the stairs and the knives in the kitchen drawer, and etc., etc. And in Sweden, actually, and this zest for life is quite contagious if the parent or grandparent is not too tired. Then this zestful life is quite, refreshing. And in Sweden, we are quite well off. There are nurseries for children from about 18 months, when they are 18 months old, and both parents have paid time off work, and the mother and father I think they can share it 50-50, the time. But is looking after children or being with children only governed by instinct? Well, I would think it depends on who is doing the caring. And I also believe that in the future, there will be, the care for children will become better and better and more humane. There will be more resources for the schools, and there'll be new methods of teaching. And because eventually we won't need to be children because we'll learn to materialize and dematerialize. But we have a while to handle the propagation until we reach that stage. And children are quite interesting creatures. They tell you the truth. Maybe you've experienced that. And so one can learn a lot about oneself by being with children. And they also, they are little animals in a way. They are repeating earlier lifetimes. And they also have the ability to sort of bring out the animal in also rather humane parents. Why are you laughing? And yeah, perhaps you all have memories of not being quite so humane as you would like to be if you're preparing a meal for some friends that are coming or another family that are coming, and suddenly you find the bathroom floor filled with water and it's spilling over into the hall, or the new bicycle was left on the pavement and now it's gone, or the granny's crystal bowl was used as a garage and now it's broken, etc. And you find yourself perhaps saying, now look what you have done. You go into your room and you stay there until I tell you to come out. And then perhaps you feel, oh, what was that? So, children can show us who we are. But there is, and if children are stressed or unhappy, they're even more difficult to deal with. But there are humane, creative psychologists who have shown us and done research and found how we can treat children better in a more humane way. And they're actually very successful. And one of them is Gordon Neufeld, a Canadian developmental psychologist who's pointed out the importance of attachment. Of course, a child needs somebody who he or she can trust will be there. Just as, it's the parent principle, it's the principle of world redemption, really, in a small way. And also to know that children, we need to give them time to mature. We tend to think that children think the way we do, but they don't think in consequences, not until rather much later. Another one, an American child psychologist who's really specialized with so-called explosive children. There are more of those nowadays. And he's got what he calls collaborative problem solving. And collaborative, in the sense working together, is that not what one does in grown-ups' workplaces when it works well? That you listen to each other, you take in ideas and try to understand different people's point of view, and you find a solution. And he says that works with children if you listen and if you find out what is going on in their mind rather than telling them how things should be and what they should think. And also these children do well if they can. Could one possibly change this? Oh, I've got something here I can use. Yeah, could one change that to terrestrial human beings do well if they can? And focus on ability rather than will. You know all these categories categories of human consciousness that Martinus, page up and page down, in many places give us in order for us to understand that we are all different, and it's not a question of will to change, but it's a question of ability, where we are in our development, how our balance between intelligence and feeling is, and that the inability to see, you understand this, is what is behind many, many, many conflicts and wars all over the world. So treating children like human beings with tolerance and understanding, it makes a very big difference. I've tried it. I worked for some years as an assistant teacher for children who were explosive. I didn't last very long. My nervous system broke down because there were too many wars going on. There's a Danish-Swedish psychologist, Bo Heilskol-Elven, who's got this term, low effective behavior. Behavior is not quite right. I haven't found a good way of translating it. It means really, in Swedish, it's lågaffektivt bemötande. It's how you meet a child, how you react. And that really means less instinct, less gravity from the grown-up, which means more feeling and more intelligence, which is intellectualized feeling. And when grown-ups use that in their reactions to children who are really difficult, their outbursts become much, much shorter. He has a rather, as an example, if a child in a classroom with other children starts throwing the furniture around, one instinctively will try to stop this child to do this because it can hit and hurt other children. But he says a better method is to get all the other children out of the room as quickly, as quietly as possible. And then yourself stand back and be still and don't look at the child. Just be there and be quiet. And the child's explosion, so to say, will pass much, much faster than if you intervene and try to stop him or her. And furniture, it's easier to buy new furniture than to take children to a hospital that have been hurt by furniture flying around. And then after this, don't give a lecture or punish. Just go and play cards or go for a walk in the forest. And it works. It works, which is not really strange. Yes, that's one area of creativity and where humaneness is growing. There are many other areas. Oh yes, yeah, we can jump that, it's the same. Here's a bunch of Scandinavian humane creative beings. I've picked them not because I'm partial, I hope, but because my knowledge is limited from other parts of the world, and I know these a bit better. You who are Scandinavian here, you would know about Selma Lagerlöf, I'm sure. She was a writer who received the Nobel Prize for Literature 1909. And she's written lots and lots of novels and short stories, and the psychology in these stories is very deep and exciting. They're also exciting and quite thrilling. And there's a spiritual dimension. Yeah, I know that there are Martinus in Stockholm when we sometimes meet for Christmas. We often read loud Selma Lagerlöf. She has some Christmas stories that are rather cosmic in their contents. And she never married. She had some close women friends who were jealous of each other. And she was very productive and quite. She also tried to organize the farm in a way that she took over from her father, to organize it in a more equal way than was common at that time. Dag Hammarskjöld, I think maybe more of you know about him. He was the UN Secretary General between 1953 and 1961. And he dealt with and tried to organize the decolonization of Africa. And he was responsible for the UN peacekeeping forces at that time, concerning Congo and also Egypt. And he had to deal with rather primitive beings, and also companies from European companies that wanted the resources of these countries. And it was he was well known to be very calm and collected, and also very strong and firm. His plane got shot when he was he was on his way to negotiate with a difficult situation. And there are speculations that it was, well, I said it was shot. That is really not quite official. Well, it is by now. And when he'd died, they found a manuscript in his office in the UN building in New York that was. He wrote that it would be published after his death. And especially the Swedish society and government then, who were very, very proud of Dag Hammarskjöld, they were astonished, because it turned out that he had a very close and deep relationship to God. And Sweden was very secular, and the whole bunch were atheists, so they didn't quite know sort of how to react. Gosh, he had a close relationship to God. Which God? And I'm sure many of you have read this book. It's called Markings in English, Vägmärken in Swedish. And it's very strong, powerful reading. Up there in the corner is Georg Riedel. He died in February this year after being a musician, a really genius jazz musician, and he made very lots of children's songs that several generations of Swedish children, and I think maybe also Danish, know. And I heard one of them played on the piano here one morning a few days ago. Du ska inte tro det blir sommar om inte någon sätter fart. Or Pippi Långstrump. Här kommer Pippi Långstrump, tjola hopp, tjola hej, tjola hoppsan. So these songs and melodies are I was trying to find a word to describe it, ingenious simplicity. And the songs that quite a few of them, or many of them, were from this author, Astrid Lindgren, who wrote 30 children's books that were been translated into, I think, over 70 languages. And in 2010, she had sold 167 million books worldwide. And they also have a spiritual dimension. And she had a child very early under difficult circumstances, and many of her books are about children without parents. And they have comforted many, many, many children all over the world. And one more, a Danish sculptor, Anne-Marie is what she's called, Anne-Marie Carl Nielsen. She was one of the first female sculptors to be taken seriously, but she had to work very hard for it. She took part. She made these mainly animals that are extremely alive. They are not standing still like this. You see, they are sort of about to move, and yeah, really fantastic. And she'd made I think it was a big horse for a competition. But when her statue was a sculpture won the first prize, but when the jury found out that she was a woman, they took the prize back. But she really fought, and eventually she got the prize, and she was very productive. And her statues are found, as Danish people know, in public places. In Copenhagen and Roskilde and other places. And she was married to the composer, Carl Nielsen, and they had 2 children. And it was not easy with 2 such creative beings and family life. But they got through a divorce and then got together again. And yeah. So, what is it we've seen here? Well, Martinus says, we saw the 2 categories of beings, one of which represents those who live in the joy of parenthood, and the other representing those who live in the joy of creation. At the same time, there are a whole host of beings, indeed by far the majority, who live in the intermediate or transitional stages of these 2 categories. Perhaps we can recognize that. And the mentality of mankind is therefore split with regard to morals, politics, and social order. Everything is a cross between these 2 stages, propagation of the race and ingenious creativity. Livets Book 3. Yes. And we see that everybody knows and everybody sees that the world is changing. Family structures and gender is changing quickly. If you climb onto the bus in Stockholm or the tube at the time when teenagers stop school, you see extremely feminine girls and very sort of also masculine boys. But for a lot of these young people, you have to wonder, is this a boy or a girl? And it's interesting that, I think that is wonderful, but there's part of me that sort of wants to know. And it's instinct. And now, where do we go here? Yes, we don't need statistics to see that things are changing, but statistics confirm that things are changing all over the world. This shows marriages per 1,000 people number of marriages in each year per 1,000 people in the population. And we're not going into detail. We can just see how these graphs, which direction they show. Now, where are you? No, that's the wrong. Oh, that's one. Sorry. I'm not very skilled at this. This is around 1980, 2018. And here we see they all are in decline. The number of marriages in the United States, South Korea, Australia, United Kingdom, Italy, Argentina, Bolivia. So they all show clearly that people marry less frequently. And this one is just England and Wales, so it's just a small number of people, but it's still quite interesting. The top one, here we have the age of them, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years over there. And the top one is then men born in 1940. When they were 30, 83% of them had married. But men born in 1980, when they were 30, about 22% had married. So that's a clear change. And here we see the average age of women at marriage. And well, they showed clearly Sweden is at the top here. It's way over 30, the age there. Norway, United Kingdom, Portugal, United States. And this is 2017. We have 2,000 there. So, yes. And this shows marriage for same-sex partners, 2019. And the areas or nations colored with blue, there is where it's legal. So we had Canada and the United States, Western Europe, Iceland, Brazil, Argentina, Australia. The red ones is where it's banned or illegal. And we also learned yesterday morning from Olav that there were still 68 countries where it was forbidden with homosexual relationships. But it's changing, and it's changing rapidly. And it's interesting, on this website, they've written, the deinstitutionalization of marriage and the rise of new family models since the middle of the 20th century show that social institutions that have been around for thousands of years can change very rapidly. Why? Well, you know, because you've read Martinus. But what people in general think, I wonder. There's no other reasonable explanation. And in order to take Martinus' explanations, you need to be interested in the rest of the world picture as well. So, are the old traditional dogmas abnormal? No, neither the marital dogmas nor the condition of the world Redeemer is abnormal. But they are to the very highest degree an expression of the meeting between two extremely different evolutionary epochs. We are at the boundary between two totally different mental spheres, namely the animal kingdom and the real human kingdom. Livets Bok, Volume 3, Section 837. The marital dogmas, and they were the ones that were advocated by Moses. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, for instance. They belong to the one-poled stage or state. And the world Redeemer, which is Christ, he taught us, love thy neighbor as thyself. And that is a support and is promoting the two-poled, double-poled state of universal love. And we're in the midst of the meetings of these two world epochs. So no wonder that it's rather chaotic. And it's also it's a question of an organic change. I mean, we are used to thinking of our physical organs having functions and promoting functions in our physiology, but also our consciousness is guided and governed by functions that have organs behind them. And the one-pole state, where one of the poles is latent, that promotes the marital state and selfishness and so on, while it's the two-poled, while neighborly love, there you need both poles, and that is then an spiritual organ in us. And if you are double-poled, it's impossible to be in a marriage. In a marriage, you need to be partial, otherwise it doesn't work. You should be at least slightly partial towards your partner. But if you're double-poled, that is impossible, because you're impartial. You love everybody just as much. And here's a bit more the description of the poles. The masculine pole should be understood as all those thoughts that express desire for superiority in strength and power, and such functions of the consciousness that promote this. Always born competitors or rivals for the autocracy of power. And an expression of the feminine pole are all those kinds of thoughts and functions of consciousness that promote a sensation of joy in being protected and favored by a superior power-seeking being. To some extent antagonistically disposed towards like-minded beings, that is, their own sex. Is there anyone who feels sort of, oh yes, I belong to that or the other? Or maybe there are more of so-called women who don't mind having a bit of power, and maybe so-called men who feel a bit tired of having power and rather take the back seat. So we are definitely grown out of that, mostly. And what are these poles, really? Well, I can't say that I really understand this, but I'm curious. So if you follow along here, we need to look at the living being. And in this symbol, you've seen it many times, most of you, and I think you agree with me that it has a simplicity and a beauty. And knowing that this is how the structure of all living beings, ants, human beings, planets, solar systems, atoms, and has been always and will always be for all eternity. I mean, just that is quite mind-blowing. And we've got the I, it's a triune principle, and these parts that we look at are never, they are always together. There cannot be an I without a creative ability and an organism. And there can't be an organism floating around without an I. And the I is the fixed point, stillness, that we share with all other I's and with the Godhead. And if we travel downwards here, and we reach the border, if there is a border really, we find the primordial desire. And the primordial desire is where sort of movement, well, there's a bit more movement, and it's an undifferentiated wish, an urge to experience life. And if we move further down, we see the mother energy that then is diverges into the six basic energies, their eternal parts and their temporal parts, here in our creative ability and ability to experience. And well, there are a lot more functions here, spiritual functions that decide how we experience life and how where we are in the spiral cycle. And way up here, be sort of behind or above, I don't know, there's no real, it's not physical. We have the pole structures. They're not shown here, but how he describes them in the text, you understand that they are very fundamental. They're not just sort of our physical sexual organs. That's just a small part of them and just a physical manifestation. Yes, and then, where are you? Oh, never mind. And then we have X3 and the created with our organism and our consciousness. But the poles are way up, so to say. And he describes it like this. The eternal I must thus, through its X2 and X3, create two different forms of energy. This creation is triggered by the two eternal centers in X2 and spread to X3, where it is perfected. These two centers are thereby the I's eternal organ of life. Takes a bit of thinking. The I's eternal organ of life. And he goes on. Through these two poles, the primordial desire of the I becomes its creative faculty, which in turn means its ability to feel pleasantness and unpleasantness. And this ability is thus the innermost structure of all sensory perception and creation. The entire experience of life is but variations in the experience of pleasantness and unpleasantness. Somehow this is both, for me, very abstract, but also, I mean, we all recognize pleasantness and unpleasantness. That's what life is in different variations. And that it's governed sort of, way up in our superconsciousness. And absolutely all movements, all formation of substances, all climatic conditions and all things that can be experienced or sensed at all are rooted and promoted in the living being's masculine and feminine poles. Yeah. With these two poles, we have come to the innermost core of life, of all life and all consciousness. All matter, substances, energies, forces, mental and physical functions are rooted in these two poles. All other kinds of talents in the living being are subdivisions of these two great general talents. And no manifestation, no form of revelation of life whatsoever can exist without being a reflection, a rhythm, or a nuance of these two poles' particular way of working and interacting. We can detect this interaction in every manifestation. When I read these things, it makes me wish that I had more intuition. Maybe you agree, because one thinks, wow, it sounds amazing, just about mind-blowing, or I know awesome is used in a very sort of, I don't quite know which word to use, but looking forward to understanding more one day. We also have this symbol showing how these poles change. It's symbol 35, the cosmic cycle of the pole principle. And we saw it yesterday morning in Ola's lecture. So we'll see. What's interesting here, where does this, no, sorry. Hello, there you are. first you see here that we're looking at 1.5 nearly spiral cycle. So it's time here is very compressed, so to say. And we recognize the kingdoms, the animal, the plant kingdom, animal kingdom, true human kingdom, the kingdom of wisdom, the divine world, and the kingdom of bliss. And here we go into the next spiral cycle and their kingdoms. And we see how the middle of the animal kingdom coincides with the culmination of darkness. And that is actually created through this transformation of the poles. It's where these figures here, the green are two beings with their sexual poles, and the green is the masculine pole, and the yellow is the feminine pole. So here we see a being who, in this spiral cycle's animal kingdom, appears as a female being. And here we have a being that in this spiral cycle's animal kingdom appears as a male being. But you see, it's a very short period, really, compared to the whole of the spiral cycle. So it's a very temporary. I'm not quite friends with this. Very temporary. And the whole point of it, from the cosmic point of view, is to create darkness. Because when we've come from all the spiritual worlds, these spiritual worlds here, and had joy and bliss and ecstasy, or ecstasy. Do you say ecstasy? Thank you. For eons of time, our consciousness starts to fade, and we need to renew it, otherwise it would fade, but it can't, it doesn't. And that's why one of the poles starts to diminish and becomes latent. And that's in the middle of the animal kingdom, when we've just rose on two legs. And hello. Oh, never mind. And the interesting thing is then when we are double-poled for eons of time and go into the next spiral cycle, it will be the other way around. The being that was a female here will be male here, and the being that was male over there will be a female here. And that is when, for us, when we are planets. And Martinus points out in this explanation to this symbol that this arrangement is necessary in order for there to be males and females at the same time, which is necessary for having offspring. And the good news, I would say, is that in its innermost principle, each being is double-poled. So what we normally think of, well, there's always been men and women, and there will always be men and women. That's really very, very temporary from the cosmic point of view. And luckily, we are in our innermost being principle, double-poled. And here we see our poles a bit more concrete, with the secondary pole, or at least our primary pole is what is manifested through our sexual organs, and the secondary pole in our brain and consciousness. And to make it a bit less abstract, we can recognize the primary pole as as governing the instinct of propagation, instinct of preservation, being selfish, unintellectual, it's driven by instinct, possessiveness, intrigues, jealousy, expectations and demands. And it's selfish, it's the root of all evil, represents darkness, but it's also the light in the darkness through the sexual union in the intercourse and within marriage. And the secondary pole, it's conscious, it's not instinctive, and it's compassionate, generous, intellectual, gives freedom, is forgiving, is lasting and reliable, and unconditional, no demands, and is the pole of universal love and represents the light, and is the root of all light and love. So luckily, that's what we are building and coming closer to. And when this grows and grows, and the landscape or state that we will arrive at, Martinus describes one way like this. Here exists an eternal youth, which all outshining beauty sparkles out from all beings and makes them each other's unshakable objects, not of amorous love, but of neighborly love. It is therefore the greatest pleasure for the beings here to meet each other and to be with each other, give each other life renewal or nourishment for their greatest sense of well-being or bliss. In truth, this is the kingdom of heaven. And the being has become a new instrument for the radiant profusion of God's Spirit, or the manifestation of universal love that shines and sparkles through the eternal space, maintaining suns and worlds and the multiplicity of living beings. The eternal world picture. So that's what we're all heading for. Thank you for listening.